Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing the humanitarian crisis in Yemen following weeks of airstrikes and ground fighting by an Arab-led coalition. And we're asking why one of the poorest countries in the region is so important to Saudi Arabia and Iran. Joining us now from London is Abu Bakr al-Shamahi. He covers Yemen for various publications, including Al-Arabi Al-Jadid English. With us in our Washington, D.C. studio is Abdul Latif Al-Mulhim. He is a columnist for the Saudi newspaper Al-Yawm and is a retired commodore in the Royal Saudi Navy. And from Berlin, we're joined by Adnan Tabatabai. He's a political analyst on Iranian affairs and the co-founder and CEO of the Center for Applied Research in partnership with the Orient. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's start with Abu Bakr in London. How would you describe the current security and humanitarian situation in Yemen right now?
On both accounts, pretty disastrous. If we're focusing on humanitarian firstly, we have a situation right now where across the country, in both Sana'a, Aden, Taiz, Hadramaut in the east, there's a lack of fuel. Electricity is running low. People have barely any electricity. Food is running low as well, food resources. So on all these different fronts, the situation is bad. And then you couple that with the conflict that is ongoing in the country, and especially in Aden, where aid is very difficult to get to those who need it. And in terms of security, again tied into the conflict, people are afraid of going out into the streets, whether it be through fear of airstrikes or fear of snipers or shelling. Aden is currently witnessing indiscriminate shelling on the part of forces allied to the Houthis and to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. And in Sana'a, you have airstrikes that have lessened, but at the same time are still, whilst hitting military targets, also affecting civilians quite severely.
Abdul Latif, we have the Saudis who are leading that coalition with these attacks on targets in Yemen. What is the Saudi goal here?
First of all, I'm glad I'm back to the show. Yemen had always been a sad story, and Saudi Arabia for decades had always tried and helped Yemen in many ways. Direct financial aids and infrastructure building, airports, schools, universities, hospitals. But unfortunately for Yemen, it never had been under a total control of a central government. It's always like the tribes are controlling everything. And Saudi Arabia had tried for the past couple of years to actually get Yemen back into being a more stable and more prosperous. But unfortunately, things didn't work as people expected, and things in Yemen started deteriorating. And there were so many interventions, mainly from Iran, who is helping the Houthis simply to overtake the country. So Saudi Arabia...
Isn't Saudi bombing of the country going to further destabilize the situation?
It was a last resort. It was a last resort. And all the bombing that is being done by Saudi Arabia, it's an Air Force-led coalition. And Saudi Arabia had used precision bombing to hit specific targets like Scud missiles that are going to be very, very dangerous when it's in the hands of the Houthis. Also, all the ammunition that could be used actually to increase the conflict within the country.
Right, Adnan, how will Iran be viewing what is taking place in Yemen right now? Because there have been numerous reports that we have seen, you are aware of them, that say that anti-government forces in Yemen are being supported by Iran.
I think we have to realize here that Yemen was not really a big issue in Iran. If you follow state media and if you follow the public discourse, Yemen has always been relatively irrelevant and not a priority. It has changed, obviously, after the Saudi-led campaign, which started 4 or 5 weeks ago, and now it's becoming an issue. But again, we have to also make sure to really estimate correctly what Iran's role in Yemen really is. Obviously, there are some sympathetic views towards the Houthis, But we're seeing more and more reports that point out that Iran's effective role on the Houthis or control of the Houthis is really not taking place. And there are too many differences between the Houthi rebel groups and their strategies and officials in Tehran.
Abu Bakr, what is the Saudi bombing doing to Yemen? Is it further destabilizing the situation? We have had the United Nations, which has been calling for a ceasefire. Nobody seems to be listening to the United Nations right now.
Well, just if I can just touch on the point my fellow guest in Washington raised about Yemen's state institutions and Saudi's aid over the years and the intervention. Whilst there was a huge amount of aid came in from Saudi over the years, a large amount of that money that was coming into Yemen was coming to Yemeni tribes in itself. So we can't say on one hand that Yemeni state institutions are weak and the state is weak, while it's at the same time supporting those very sections of society that will, in effect, if they grow more powerful, will in effect weaken the state. You know, if you keep on funding non-state actors, you then can't be surprised that a state is then suddenly weak. And with regards to the current airstrikes, I think with the Houthis and the situation the Houthis and Ali Abdullah Saleh had gotten into over the last couple of years, the Houthis have steadily progressed across the country. Various different negotiations agreed upon, or agreements agreed upon at the end of conflicts, and then the Houthis would then, a couple of weeks or a couple of months down the line, go back on those agreements. And so I think whilst at the same time, you know, we do looking at the Saudi airstrikes and the effect they have had a negative effect to a degree on Yemeni society right now. We can't look at that from one angle and forget the other angle, which is that the forces inside Yemen, the Houthis and Ali Abdullah Saleh, a figure who Saudi Arabia ironically allowed to come back into Yemen in 2011 when he was in Saudi Arabia. They allowed him to come back to Yemen in 2011 during the revolution in 2011, and he has responded and replied to that by attempting to engineer his return and his own family's return. So this is in effect a problem that Yemen now faces from because of internal actors. And now, on top of the kind of the internal conflict Yemen has now had, the destabilizing effect that internal conflict had, we now have the added dimension of an external conflict that unfortunately we don't really see what a realistic end goal or strategy is.
Abdullah Chief, we had another alarming development over the weekend, or we heard of another alarming development, and that was the alleged use by Saudi Arabia of cluster munitions. These are very indiscriminate weapons. It can lead to the killing of a great deal of civilians. I mean, these weapons have been banned in 116 countries.
Yeah, but if they are used, for the guest in Berlin, with all respect, Saudi Arabia interfered in Yemen after years of the Iranian intervention in Yemen. That's one thing. Second thing is for the guests in London, Saudi Arabia didn't only give the tribes the money, but we built schools and hospitals and roads and a lot of infrastructure installations. So this should be for the good of the people.
Okay, let's go to the question of the use of these weapons.
Of these kind of in every conflict, you would hear very different reports, and it was. I think the reports came out from the Houthi that cluster bombs being used.
No, these reports are from Human Rights Watch, which is a very respected human rights monitoring group.
Where did they get the reports from? When did they get the reports from? And to be very frank with you, for Yemen, the only people who could solve the Yemenis' stability and prosperity are the Yemenis themselves. Saudi Arabia didn't want this war, and as a matter of fact, a week ago, Saudi Arabia declared that it's going to stop all the military activities. But in return, the Saudi borders had been attacked, and we had a lot of soldiers being killed along the Saudi borders, and we simply cannot be quiet about it. Yemen makes a big difference to Saudi Arabia. It's bordering Saudi Arabia with hundreds of kilometers, with a population of 30 million people, and Yemen has to be very stable for the good for Yemenis, Yemenis and Saudi Arabia.
Let me go to Adnan in Berlin. Adnan, the Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says his country is not seeking to dominate Yemen, and he also echoed that United Nations call for a ceasefire. Let's listen to what he had to say about the role of Saudi Arabia and Iran.
It's not a negotiation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran and Saudi Arabia need to talk. But this, I mean, we cannot talk to determine the future of Yemen. This is an intra-Yemeni dialogue. Yemenis have to speak to themselves. Everybody else has to facilitate.
So the question is, Adnan, can Iran play a meaningful role in bringing the two sides together, ending the fighting, seeking some kind of a political solution to this?
I really believe Iran can, and Iran has the responsibility to do so as a regional power. Obviously, for Saudi Arabia, there is much more at stake, as was already hinted to by our colleague in Washington, with 1,800 kilometers of borders to Yemen. Therefore, it's much more important for Saudi Arabia to have a stabilized country neighboring. And Iran can exert its influence, and it can exert this influence in a constructive manner. And I think if we recall what President Rouhani, after his election, alongside his Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, have been saying, and the outreach towards Riyadh has always been one of regional cooperation. I completely acknowledge the grievances that exist previous to the 2013 elections between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But I think after the election of this current administration in Tehran, there has always been outreach from Tehran, which, however, did not resonate well in Saudi Arabia. But I think Mr. Zarif pointed to the important fact that this is an inter-Yemeni issue, and we should all do the best to basically strengthen the actors on the ground to come together and talk.
Abu Bakr, what are your thoughts on a political solution?
It would be brilliant to have a political solution. The problem is it realistic at the current time? There's increased antagonism in Yemen between all the sides. When we look at for example, the south, the events that are going on in Aden right now, in terms of the killing and the death and the conflict that's ongoing in Aden, that hatred that conflict is now engendering in Aden towards those from the north will be very difficult to eradicate in this generation. We're talking about snipers shooting people indiscriminately in the street, and then in other parts of Yemen, you know, when we have a government effectively in exile in Saudi Arabia, seeking legitimacy, every day they spend outside of the country delegitimizes them in the eyes of many Yemenis, especially those in the north. So people in Sana'a and the areas, a lot of the areas controlled by the Houthis, who are living under the airstrikes, will say, how can we, you know, deal with Hadi or Bahah or anyone who's outside the country? And I just mentioned Bahah there, who is the vice president. He's perhaps the one hopeful element that many Yemenis can, even those who support Saleh and the Houthis, who perhaps respect Bahah to a degree, and perhaps hope that he can become a more or less unifying figure for a post-conflict presidential council. But we'll have to go through many difficult steps, and a lot of sides will have to compromise to reach that agreement. And right now, it's very hard to see where those compromises are going to come from.
Abdul Latif, the fighting continues. The humanitarian situation is getting worse by the day. As Abu Bakr just pointed out, many compromises will have to be made. Is this realistic?
Well, there are many parts of what Abu Bakr said I agree with. But unfortunately, the atrocities in Yemen happening right now, it's not the first time that happened. It had been going on, and especially during the 70s, during the revolution against, or the coup against Al-Hamdi and Al-Ghashmi. I mean, there were civil wars and so many killings also in 1994. So the internal fighting in Yemen is nothing new. As far as our friend in Berlin, Saudi Arabia had extended the hand to Iran to sit down and have a good dialogue. But we always hear good words from Iran, but in reality, no, we don't see anything. As a matter of fact, there are so many clear threats from Iranian officials against Saudi Arabia, and just Iran doesn't want to sit down with Saudi Arabia.
So
or
you're
the Gulf
not very
states.
optimistic about a political solution?
With Yemen, I'm optimistic, especially when Saudi Arabia declared that there will be ceasefire. I mean, there will be stopping bombing, and let's sit down and talk.
Okay, we're running out of time. Adnan, very quickly, what is your response to that? Saudi Arabia, according to Abdul Latif, has reached out. Iran has not responded.
Well, I think it has been, in the past almost 2 years, it has been quite the opposite. I think that with the current administration in Tehran, we have people in the cabinet who have been in ministerial office in the 90s, where Iran's and Saudi's relations have not been that bad. We have a president who has an experience in this, and a foreign minister who is, a well-educated diplomat. I think from that side, actually, the willingness is there, and obviously, the passing of King Abdullah kind of brought some changes on the domestic scene in Saudi Arabia, and maybe that has also further complicated the process. But I think that with the regional threats, the two have no choice but to sit together and talk.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it, gentlemen. Thanks to all of you for joining us.